Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We're a small crowd, so the ones at the end of the room, feel free to come forward. I think that it's going to be a rather interactive session today. So, welcome to this parallel session in the framework of INGSA2024 on city-led science diplomacy, and particularly how science diplomacy can be leveraged as a cooperation tool among cities and building resilience at the city level. The topic of the conference and the entire INGSA network is on scientific advice, which sometimes is related to science diplomacy, but not always. I would just like do like a quick poll just by raising your hands. Who's familiar with science diplomacy or works or engaged usually in science diplomacy? Okay, so well, most of you I see. So amazing. We don't need to go through the usual explanations about the topic. Anyway, we'll try to make sure that this is a conversation that is understandable and reachable for everyone. So in the last decades, we've seen a couple of big trends going on in international relations and global governance. On the one side, the rising role of cities, of global cities, being more and more relevant and being almost autonomous or at least more relevant geopolitical actors themselves, and through their being economic powerhouses, gathering most of the talent, knowledge industries, universities, and so on. So we've been seeing more and more new forms of city diplomacy. And on the other side, we've seen the rising role of science and technology in global governance. Science diplomacy is the main example, and we see how science inform foreign policy, and we have more and more countries implementing their own national science diplomacy strategies, appointing science envoys or tech diplomats, among others. So it was about time that these two big trends, the trend of city diplomacy or cities being more relevant diplomatic actors and science diplomacy came together, and we start seeing more cities deploying their own science diplomacy strategies. 6 years ago, we saw how the city of Barcelona became the world's first city with a science diplomacy strategy, positioning its scientific institutions, universities, research centers, tech companies as a tool for international cooperation, international positioning, and positioning the know-how produced in the local scientific ecosystem as a tool for global good, a global common. So this has been followed by many other cities in the last few years. Now we have examples like Geneva, Mexico City, Miami, among others. And that's something that we're starting to see also rising in the Global South. In order to discuss this, the role of science and science diplomacy in cities, how different actors from national governments, local governments, scientific academies, or even universities play a role in the building of city-led science diplomacy. Today we have with us an extraordinary array of speakers representing different institutions and nationalities. We have with us Dr. Jackie Cato, which is the Executive Director of the Network of African Science Academies based in Kenya. We have with us also Anthony Banky, Assistant Professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. Thank you, Anthony, coming from New York. And we have with us also Alice Higiro, which is the Project Director for Smart Cities at the Ministry of ICT and Innovation of the Government of Rwanda. Thank you so much, Alice, for joining us. And we have online Mr. Esteban Leon, who's the Head of City Resilience Global Program at UN Habitat, who's going to bring us the perspective from a UN organization. So let's get started by getting some of the main insights and expertise from our fellow speakers today. Anthony, from your perspective, working on urban planning and building and bringing technologies and data as a tool for better urban planning, urban environmental issues, and seeing how data and smart technologies can be embedded in the design of cities and how cities cooperate with other cities, but also deal with their own citizens, because we often had a discussion. Smart cities is not just having plenty of devices here and there, but it's also how we leverage this technology for a more just city for the citizens. What's your perspective on how this technology might be leveraged to solve some of the challenges that urban areas or cities face?
This is, yep, good. So unfortunately, I'll answer by being both an academic and a diplomat in that I'll answer it my own way, and academic being long-winded. But I also wanted to say I'm here, in Kigali, and I'm really excited to be here. I just wanted to make a comment about my home institution and the student protests. Unfortunately, in many institutions in the United States, I've talked to some of my other colleagues with who have students or presence in the United States, and the kind of the curtailing of free speech and protests. I stand in solidarity with kind of people who are trying to speak up peacefully, especially when many of these institutions are a threat. So, I recognize the people back home who are suffering much more while I'm sitting comfortably, here in Kigali. I think the interesting thing, a couple points to your question. I think one, cities. As was mentioned in the plenary this morning, North America is having a very different conversation with regard to how we're thinking about participating in INGSA. Partially because of just how governments, the Canadian and the US government are operating. The federal government has certain powers and, certain roadblocks. But cities are where politics has to step aside at some point and policies have to work. Because at the end of the day, much like here, if the pothole in the road exists, you're not going to yell at the president. You're going to yell at local government. If my water pipe is leaking, I'm going to complain about the city. So this is where the rubber meets the road, literally. So it begs a different type of approach to science advice and science diplomacy. And especially when we talk about these larger global issues, I think we're going to talk about climate a lot at this conference and on this panel, because that's where climate issues are most realized, in that we have the closest interface with citizens. So, when we think about technology, I think, also reflecting on my kind of own history and thinking about smart cities, I was in grad school doing my doctorate studies in the beginning of the second wave and into the second wave of the smart cities, where we moved away from kind of just government, and it really became about digitization. That everything is going to be instrumented. And I've been thinking a while of how do we think about it? I mean, the role of the academic, right? I get to sit and think about this. And the opportunities are, one, yes, many companies, many parties are saying, let's do Internet of Things, let's put a sensor in everything. And we're going to optimize the heck out of infrastructure. But I think that there are other approaches. I think there's another way of looking at the data that we're producing opportunistically, right? If you think about the telcos that you're using, every time you make a phone call, or connect to a website, look at a Facebook post, there's operational data, not because they're trying to think of it in a smart city sense. They just need to make sure that the network is running. But you could use that opportunistically, saying, yes, there are limitations, and that data is incredibly complex. But that gives a picture of human mobility. How do people move in the city? You could look at it with privacy, protections, because it's just how many pings are on a tower, and a tower is located physically in space. And then I think also there are opportunities to think about engagement with citizens. We've, in many other conversations similar to this, we've talked about citizen science, right? Not only are they now participating, and Barcelona is a leader in citizen science, but that I think that because the democratization of technology, they have access to tools that we are using in government, in academia, and in industry. They have, fairly affordably in some places, access to the Google Cloud. You're getting, access to the world's most powerful computers. Pick any of the big companies. But, for not too crazy what it was, 10 years ago, it's availing really huge opportunities in pluralizing who is creating data in cities, right? And the knowledge experts are now diffused. So I think the public sector is a really interesting role, because to be honest, many of our cities do not have access to maybe experts in the way that we want. I would say New York is lucky that they have that, but there were but many cities, especially when we had the conversation today about North America, second-tier cities don't. A Detroit does not have, data scientists sitting at the ready in City Hall. They're relying on other institutions. They're relying on other cities for lessons. Frankly, I think there could be a conversation, we're talking about South-South conversations. I think a Kigali-Detroit conversation would be useful where I used to work, and frankly, we could probably learn a lot from Kigali. So there's an opportunity there to find these cities participating as conveners, because in that role, they can help co-generate the questions, the relevant questions and debates that need to happen between industry, academia, and institutions. So to be very concrete, thinking about kind of my own experiences. So as a way to step back into my biography, I'm at Columbia now, but in my previous experiences, I helped start the urban technology degree program at the University of Michigan, as well as at MIT, I helped co-found DesignX, which was the first academic accelerator for the built environment, for cities in particular. And the gap there, and at Michigan, was that we have such great ideas coming out of the university, right? Many of your theses and dissertations, and what happens to it? They get published, and then they collect dust. As great as we think, unless you won the Nobel Prize, a lot of them, disappear. Versus thinking about how do we valorize that? Give opportunities for students to say, how do we take it out into the real world? Maybe you create a social enterprise. Maybe you create a billion-dollar company. I mean, it's a very MIT kind of, idea. But that we, as a platform, connected them with government, connected them with potential clients to say, how do we test this in a way that protects citizens, but validates maybe the research you have in the real world, and test whether there is a market for that. So we had this one startup started off in 2018, looking at biochemical traces in wastewater. I think you know where I'm going with this. And they partnered, and we worked with them to nurture this company that was taking research that was collaboratively done with urban planning at MIT, as well as biochemical engineering, to partner with cities. And they identified an issue that was really important to some cities, the opioid epidemic. So they're trying to see where, could you find in the wastewater these traces? Well, they created a platform that was the fastest in the world. They could do, community level tracing in 24 hours. They validated technology. And then what happened in 2020, we all know. And that, as a company, an engagement that we help foster between them now as industry and cities, helped create the data that I think is leading to change. And of course, it doesn't have to be through companies. My own work right now, I'm working with NGOs and nonprofits in New York to look at issues of environmental justice with air quality, not with the atmospheric science, but we're looking at it at the local level. We're instrumenting citizens to understand, which is a big problem in New York, indoor air quality, where actually that is just severely more dangerous to the lived experience than the outdoor air quality, for a variety of historic reasons of how we built our buildings, the vintage of buildings, all of that. But that is us working with NGOs that is convened by the city to advocate for policy change, right? And we're hoping to scale that up. We've had conversations with other cities to also maybe have conversations about what environmental justice is. So again, like the role of the public sector then is to bring these people together. So diplomacy in a different way, diplomacy locally, right? Because in the United States, the challenges are very different. So to going back, I think to your earlier kind of point about, these conversations, the role of city science in this is that we can now co-generate questions in a different way. And I think we can also think about what those metrics are, because we're now not just creating a plural voice, we're creating a collective intelligence, really that is derived by the many fingerprints of all the stakeholders at the cities. And I think that's a powerful part, because the feedback loops will evolve and change, and I think in our context we'll talk about that. But I think, at least in my perspective, the really interesting part is that we're asking, I think, better questions. It's not abstract anymore. Air quality is not just PM 2.5. It is your life, what you breathe, or it's your community facing challenges, with disease spread, or with the opioid epidemics that are at the interface between citizens, and all the kind of the data that we can produce. So again, as I said, I apologize for the long-winded answer. Academic gets to do that. But I think that is really where the idea of kind of like cities as the conveners and sharing information becomes incredibly powerful, because it works very differently than maybe a federal government or national government talking about it, because we are talking about the life of citizens, ultimately.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Actually, that was making me think how we often, when we talk to cities, they remind us how, since they are the closest level of government to citizens, their way of implementing particularly policies related to science, data, or also international relations is more collaborative and multi-stakeholder and more bottom-up rather than top-down, as compared to national science diplomacy approaches are obviously they include many stakeholders that are part of the science or diplomatic ecosystems, but tend to be more centralized than in the case of city. And I was also thinking when you were talking about this network that we launched together with New York, Barcelona, Amsterdam, but now we have over 50 different cities that are not all of them big cities, and which is this City Alliance for Digital Rights, which is a great example of how cities try to empower themselves and their citizens to own the data that is collected through all these technologies and from the city governments. And I think this is a great example of using tech in cities, but also cooperating. So it's bridging this scientific and technological advice together with city-to-city diplomacy.
Exactly. And just to comment on that, only because I taught this in my class literally last week, right? Like, especially in the United States, I mean, the issues around issues of privacy and rights with regard to these different surveillance sectors, surveillance with a small s, technologies, is of concern, but there has been absolute gridlock. There has been no movement other than selling TikTok, which was added into a budget bill, right? That's it. We haven't had really any conversations since the health, privacy standards 20-something years ago, Clinton administration, I believe. Right? But cities then recognizing these issues, right? The fact that cities like New York and other ones in the United States are collaborating with Europe and cities around the world to talk about it, to provide a benchmark, a baseline level of protections, is incredibly important. That cities have led the way, and in some ways they actually surpass GDPR, right? Because they're talking about this more fundamentally. So that's, I think, the real power, because people are concerned, and cities are wanting to adopt these technologies for operational reasons, but recognize that there is potential threats with the same opportunities that are availed by the technology. And cities indeed have led it because people are asking for it.
Actually, I've heard many city leaders in some of these city networks that we have around there saying, and I don't want to be provocative, particularly for those representing national governments, that saying, while nations listen, cities act. And that's many times because what you were saying, they're closer to citizens. And particularly in the case of the United States, as you were mentioning, the relevance of cities, I mean, sometimes when we talk about city diplomacy or city-led science diplomacy, it might seem an invention of a few cities that they just want to get more protagonism or whatever. But the Biden administration appointed a Department of City and State Diplomacy inside the State Department, led by Ambassador Nina Hitchigan, which is the former Director of International Relations in the city of Los Angeles, which is a great example how from a national perspective, from the federal government, cities are included as a key tool for diplomacy. So in this case, the U.S. is leading, particularly with very specific examples we saw in the past when during Trump administration was pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and over 50 cities and states from the United States say, hey, we keep committed, we pledge to keep committed to do our part of the Paris Accord despite what the federal government is doing. And this is a great example of cities engaging in science diplomacy despite of what the federal government was doing.
And valorize data and technology and are looking to opportunities with that in very different ways. The fact that now institutions are also supporting, despite all the changes in administrations over the years, both federal and local, that this is keeping it going and that they have a sub-network to talk about this and how to share information both within the US and internationally as well, which is really powerful.
Thank you, Anthony. So moving from academia, cities, and the US to Rwanda and national governments, Alice, you're leading this smart cities strategy of the Ministry of ICT and Innovation of the government of Rwanda. Kigali is particularly well known worldwide for being one of the cities at the forefront of smart cities. I remember that a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, Barcelona and Kigali, we signed a cooperation agreement in science and technology cooperation, and that the Smart City Expo World Congress that every year takes place in Barcelona, which is the leading Smart City Congress, took place in Kigali in its African edition last year. So in this case, from a national perspective, working on a local approach on smart cities and urban technology, how instruments do national governments put forward to enhance those technologies in favor of cities and citizens, and how do you see that this is connected as well with the previous conversation about data ownership and privacy and so on, and how this is a tool also for cooperation for other cities?
Thank you, Alexis. I do apologize if you can hardly hear me. I had a brilliant idea to visit my dentist yesterday, so now my mouth is not operating as it should. But thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you, Anthony, for speaking so passionately about this. I'll try to match your passion. So when it comes to Rwanda, if you allow, I'll just share a bunch of examples to really bring this home in our experiences, the failures, the successes we've had. Back to what Anthony was talking about in terms of data, we realized very early on that this was a key element for us in terms of also not just talking about data, but also predetermining the data sets, the critical data sets that we need to be able to achieve the results that we need. And I like what Anthony said about it not being just for operational purposes, but also for really, at the end of the day, looking at how do we improve the life of a citizen, just that one person, one at a time, if we can even go that way. So my discussion here really, I wanted to shape it in a sense of there's the aspect of data, there's the aspect of an integrated approach in terms of all of government, and also people-centeredness. So our experience is, yes, we have the National Smart City Master Plan that we launched in 2017, but then with that we also experienced a few things that we did not achieve the pace that we wanted, or we did not achieve the results that we wanted at the speed that we desired. And so we had to stock take and look at what went wrong, what did we do right and can enhance, or what did we do wrong that we need to work on. But so very quickly for us, last year at the Smart City Summit here in Africa, the Africa Smart City Summit that happened here, we launched our Smart City Hub, and the Smart City Hub really is to be the convener and vehicle that promotes smart cities for sustainable living. And some of the key things here that allow me to share with you 4 key points. One was to look at how do we foster collaboration and partnerships that Anthony has already spoken about, and Alexis. And we were looking at, so cities are, some are operating in their own, with their own hat, just me as one city, but not looking at the interconnectedness of the cities, but also the national level. But also we had an issue of operations happening in silos and duplication of efforts and infrastructure and so on. And so we really looked at how do we bring everyone under one roof so we can have one discussion. And then if we are splitting roles, we split roles, but knowing well that we're all driving towards a common goal and we're speaking the same language. And also we have varying expertise that we are borrowing from. Obviously cities and governments don't always have the skills that they need for all these things that we talk about. Recently we were talking to a mayor who was saying, I want to do this. I want to turn my city into a smart one, but my own staff don't even understand what smart cities mean. They don't have the skills. I don't have data scientists. How can you help me? And so we came in as the Smart City Hub. We say we have a program called Smart City Connect, which is where all these ecosystem actors can collaborate. So we told him, okay, we have the data scientists in our ecosystem. We have the networks of everyone that you need. Basically, they can come, sit, do workshops with your team, do some capacity building and so on to help solve your challenge. And then secondly was also, we looked at how do we enhance citizen engagement. I was looking at some research by, I think, Smart City World, where they talked about when the different cities that they surveyed, they said a fifth of them, less than a fifth of them, said that they did not involve citizens in drawing priorities for that city. And so if you're designing solutions to serve the citizens, but you're not involving them in that design process, then really this is where most of us have failed in the past. And personally, that was some of the stock taking that we had to do. And we've since then applied a few workshops or surveys where we've come up with, these are the challenges within the city. How do we go about developing solutions? And then we've had co-designing workshops with the citizens, where sometimes we've completely pivoted from the solution we as government had thought would be relevant, and then the citizens said, actually no, this is what we think would help us most, and then we've had to pivot. And it was such an interesting approach, and we had our data scientists on board at the time. They were crunching all this data and making sense of it. Maybe second last, innovation infrastructure or the innovation ecosystem. We've really had to invest and increase our investment into the ecosystem. Rwanda right now has more than 60 innovation hubs and accelerators, but all of them, as I mentioned, were doing different things and capacity building programs, but at the end of the day, we realized they were not yielding results that were really impactful because everyone was working on their own, they were not talking to each other, and so we now started bringing them together to collaborate, to talk. Some have created some synergies, others have realized, actually, let's pivot this way, and it's really yielding immense results. And also integrated platforms. Maybe I'll end on this one. Integrated digital platforms. For recently in our Ministry of Infrastructure, we launched something we call the UDM, so Urban Dynamic Map, where we're using geospatial infrastructure planning, because we realized we had so many infrastructure programs overlapping, and then I think you've all seen this, where they're constructing a road and then you see a water pipe exploding, and then suddenly electricity cuts, and then suddenly the fiber is out. So with this geospatial platform, we've brought all of this data in one place where you can see all the electricity lines, where the water pipes are passing, where the fiber is cutting, and so on. And so this is helping us to really, we were wasting a lot of budget, a lot of time, a lot of resources, and then there was just immense frustrations. I think you've all seen where the government has announced construction of a road, and then it takes 5 years to happen because of all of these issues, miscoordination. So the Urban Dynamic Platform really has come for us to solve this issue. Now we are talking about everything. As I mentioned before, we're talking data, we're talking about integrated approach, communication across the different government agencies, but also now with the private sector, with academia and the others. And lastly, people-centeredness, now including our citizens in the design processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. I think that your point about cooperation, sharing information, it's really relevant. Yesterday, in a side event, we were precisely discussing about this, not so much on the case of smart cities and approaches to smart cities, but more on science advice mechanisms. Every time different governments, even in the same country, but also across countries, we try to reinvent the wheel and create new databases, new systems, new mechanisms, new methodologies. And just through events like this one is when you get to share information. Maybe you don't need to redo things again, and we can optimize resources. And in cases like the one you're saying, I think it's really relevant. I was having a discussion a couple of weeks ago. Barcelona, I mean, I mentioned Barcelona so many times because I represent the science and technology ecosystem of Barcelona, apart from being a Barcelona Football Club fan. And part of our efforts in Barcelona in science diplomacy is attracting international organizations working on science diplomacy. And just a couple months ago, UNICEF opened its Giga Center, which is a body of UNICEF that works to bring internet to all the schools in the world. And it works particularly a lot in the global south. And one of the main findings when they were starting the project is that different cities in different regions in the same country, different countries, they were trying to implement new systems to bring internet in different ways, while they were not making the most of other efforts and funding that was already put in place in a neighboring region. So this, apart from bringing technology or funding, this Giga Center from UNICEF is also trying to gather all the best practices so we can learn from all those things that have already been done. And indeed, I was just like thinking about that when you were discussing the particular cases of how you're supporting those smart city efforts across government and regions in Rwanda. Moving now to international organizations, we have online Esteban Leon. Esteban, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. It seems that we have some internet problem and we cannot see you. We're not sure if you can see us, but at least we can hear you perfectly.
Yes, thanks. I can see you, but you can't see me because my internet is very weak. Sorry.
Okay. We're talking about technology, and technology is failing us today. But thank you so much for joining us online. Stefan, you're leading the Urban Resilience Hub of UN Habitat, which is the UN body in charge of urban and human settlements. And part of your work is related to how we decarbonize public transport, how we bring sustainable energy to urban areas, how we manage waste and water in cities. And these are examples of how global cities leverage science and technical knowledge, in this case, for example, to tackle climate change. So part of UN Habitat works is to bring together cities to make this transition possible by promoting these evidence-based, science-backed solutions. I'd like to ask you from your experience and expertise after all these years at UN Habitat, how do you think that cities can foster evidence-based and city-led climate actions, and how can cities, as places that most of the population is concentrated and they are over affected by the consequences of climate change, how cities can act as laboratories or test beds for policy experimentation and multi-stakeholder partnerships, as we were just mentioning, for sustainable development?
Thanks. Well, it's a very interesting question, and the answer is in the development, or was in the development of the same program that I'm managing. I'm the head, as you said, of the City Resilience Global Program, which developed the Urban Hub. UN Habitat, as you mentioned, is the city agency of the United Nations. So we basically work with cities and in cities. We believe, as you mentioned during your previous discussion, we believe that cities are the first line of response to any kind of crisis situation. This is on natural disasters as well as post-conflict situations. Therefore, cities need support for responding to this massive mandate, let's say. So in 2004, UN Habitat decided to work very much into what is a humanitarian response to crisis. But very quickly, we realized that it's much better to start working on building resilience, and this includes climate resilience in cities. And why is that? Because if we run after disasters and we respond all the time, we are soon going to run out of capacities, clearly. So we have to build capacities at the city level for them to start building resilience to crisis, including climate change. That's the premise. In 2013, thanks to the city of Barcelona, and here comes Barcelona again, we decided to put the City Resilience Global Program in Barcelona to work together with the city of Barcelona, Ayuntamiento de Barcelona. And we started working in developing a methodology that is exactly diagnosing the level of resilience in cities. Now, this is based, of course, in evidence. We cannot diagnose without collecting data and information, without analyzing that data and information, and without coming with a proper diagnosis of how the city reacts to different challenges, including climate challenges. So we have done that from 2013, and we have tested and calibrated this methodology in many cities around the world. I mean, we work in East Africa, Mozambique, we work in West Africa and Senegal, we work in Latin America, Asunción, Paraguay, we work in the coldest city in the world, in Yakutsk, Siberia, in the warmest city in the world, in Brazil, Teresina. We worked in the Caribbean region. We work in Asia Pacific, in Vanuatu, and we started calibrating that methodology. The whole premise of the methodology is exactly what you are discussing in this panel, is to collect data and information, analyze this data and information, provide evidence-based diagnostics to the city, and start working in a multi-stakeholders manner that consider multi challenges and starts working on a multi-sectoral way. So we start providing recommendations for actions to cities for them to start addressing where their deficits are. For example, we divide shocks and stresses. Shocks are externalities that comes and put a city in crisis, and stresses are internalities. So basically, based on that, we start working and saying, well, you may have this problem in future if you have a crisis in this area. So rounding back, for example, in all the cities that we have started working, we discover that most of the crisis situation or the stresses are in water management, not only supply, but water management, on waste management, for example, on mobility. But at the same time, if we start checking what are the challenges, the main challenge that most cities have at the moment are climate related. So therefore, if we put together the challenges and we put together the stresses that they have, we know that we have to start working in upgrading some of the urban systems. And that's where it comes the urban hub. We start working on the urban systems and start upgrading these urban systems, but based on evidence, on data. Now, let me tell you what the problem is of the program at the moment. We can serve and support 3 or 4 cities at a time per year. And as you know, if we know that 45,000 cities or 50,000 cities are in the world at the moment, you can make the math, and you can see that we are not going to be able to support all cities at the same time. I mean, to arrive to 45,000 cities supported and diagnosed by our methodology is going to be impossible. And that's why we believe in partnerships. We believe in working together. We believe in transmitting this knowledge of creating a smart cities in a way that they know their own problems. They can act on their own problems. At the same time, we are trying to develop and use the artificial intelligence and new technologies in order to accelerate the data collection and the data analytics of this methodology. The main premise is that if we can develop a model using artificial intelligence that can collect data quickly and can analyze that data quickly based on previous experiences, we are going to be able to provide diagnostics and recommendations for actions to more and more cities at the same time. So I do believe that smart cities are not only about technology, but are also about how to respond and how to react and how to build resilience in the cities that we work on. That's the premise of the program, and that's the objective of the whole United Nations Habitat Program in general. You mentioned something about policy, and in fact, yes. Once we provide that and we know what are the areas where we have to work, this should become a national policy. And therefore, we should provide a national strategy for urban resilience. And if governments, national governments start adopting these policies, then cities will follow and start implementing. Of course, we do believe that normative and operational come together. So basically, if we have a good experience as the one we had in Barcelona, as the one we had in Asunción, or many other cities around the world, and we can elevate that experience at the national level and have this national policy done, then we can use that national policies in other cities. But it doesn't limit itself to cities only. At the moment, we have an agreement with the regional government of Catalonia, Generalitat de Catalunya, and we are implementing this at the regional level as well. So we are working at the moment in 52 municipalities in Catalonia. So basically, from a city, we are elevating this to a region. And we do believe that from a region, we can elevate to a national level. And from a national level, we should be able to elevate this to a global response on climate resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I think that it's so interesting that you cover some of the topics that we were discussing about sharing best practices and the use of technology, and how cities need to deal through science and technology to challenges that are global, and then sometimes we assume it's just a matter of national governments to work on them, and cities are extremely affected and do have the tools. And it's also a way to highlight how city-led science diplomacy is not something that we discuss in cities or in national governments, but that also UN bodies work into this. So it's a great example. And I really would like to highlight this point you were mentioning about scalability. I mean, UN Habitat and the Urban Resilience Hub might not be capable of doing all this work for all cities, but how city-to-city exchanges and knowledge transfer, as well as building the capacities into the regional and national governments to support their cities through those mechanisms and methodologies that you have developed is a great tool to help them move forward without always depending on a single organization, like in this case, UN Habitat. Thank you, Seven. And now moving to the role of scientific academies. Jackie, she's the executive director of the Network of African Science Academies. And we have been seeing how in science diplomacy, we have more and more non-state actors taking an important role. Obviously cities, as we were discussing, but of course universities and science academies that play a crucial role in building this knowledge that then is put into use for policymakers. So I would like to ask you, what's the role of science and technology in the case of the African science academies that you represent when trying to advance some of these global challenges we were mentioning and achieving the 2030 agenda and all these big challenges we have ahead? And how are scientific societies and academies enhancing Pan-African cooperation? How are they, or how is an institution like yours that gathers all these institutions a tool of science diplomacy across Africa?
Thank you. Thanks. Am I audible? Yeah. No? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, Alexis. And I think what you called us, I find that really interesting, non-state actors. You know, when you're a non-state actor, then you have a lot more to prove and you need a lot more time to build a case for what you do and the relevance of what you do. So I work with an organization that's called the Network of African Science Academies. We are based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I have the honor of serving as the executive director. A network like ours essentially brings together science academies from the continent. And to date, I am happy to report that we have 30 science academies that are part of that consortium. Science academies are just associations or a collective of scientists that come together and try and impact not just society but also policy. And because we are different countries, different nationalities, operating in different spaces, also the nature of science academies are different from one country to another, a lot of science diplomacy is needed, not just to get us to act as a collective, but also to have a shared vision. When it comes to specifically looking at the Agenda 2030, I think most of the times what we get to see is that any individual at any one time is faced with 4 big goals to look at. There's the global goals, then you come to your continent, you have the regional goals. So for us, it's the Agenda 2030 that you also have to make inference to. Then you come locally, then you have your national goals. So like I'm Kenyan, so permanently have to hear what the Kenyan government is saying about our vision 2030, for instance. And then you also have personal goals. How am I relevant to all these big goals? So what we do as science academies is to try and get scientists to actually get the science out of the lab and into the spaces that it is very, very well needed. So when you talk about data, technology, we're talking about engaging more with policymakers and society. And I like what Anthony said, is the appreciation of collective knowledge. That scientists stop talking at policymakers, they stop talking at society because they feel that they're the learned society, but rather talk with society. And that discussion at the Network of African Science Academies has shifted how academies review research questions, how academies look at their contribution to the national development agenda, and even at the city level. So let me refer to two specific programs that the network has been able to participate in, and I think really speaks to cities and realizing SDGs. So for instance, we have this program on transdisciplinary research. We're looking at leading integrated research in the continent. The idea there was to get early career researchers to speak with their national governments, so people at local authority levels, but then also be able to impact academia. So we're talking of university institutions coming into the play. But last and not least is to engage with their local communities. One interesting thing is when we had a call around smart cities, and I think we were looking at SDG 6, if I'm not wrong at that time, and the shift of how the ordering of SDG goals would be at a local community level was so different. I mean, when you think SDG 1 is zero poverty, and then there's no hunger, you'd think those were crucial. To this one local community that we were engaging in, they say their priority is Agenda 5. So they would reorder the whole SDG goals to prioritize their own initiative, and SDG 5 became number 1 in their eyes, and then partnership was next. And then I think for us is the scientists to put down their academic hat and be able to come up with data and come up with results that would convince the local community that their contribution to the designing and the co-production of the data that will be produced henceforth would be helpful to them. So it took the university getting out of the university and having discussions with multiple stakeholders around that topic. The other thing, and this is the next project that we looked at, is decarbonization in Africa, and specifically looking at transport. One thing that was clear, even when we looked at that, and the fact that it is an SDG goal when you're looking at climate change, was the shift in the African contextual continent, that electrification is not necessarily decarbonization. Because we have issues with grid, we have issues with supply of electricity, which is an interesting case. I told you I was from Kenya, and recently, because we have so much flooding in country, can you believe it that the electricity company decide intentionally to switch off electricity during the floods? But it is scientifically informed. You'd rather save lives and have people grow up in the dark during the flood than have them be electrocuted. But it took the intervention of the local community and the scientists to see value that profit at the time of calamity is not really crucial, but it is saving lives. So it is those things that get you to think that science really has to be relevant to society and has to take cognizance of the fact that it is a holistic approach, because societal issues are actually wacky, complex, and really take time to come up to a conclusive position. Then when you ask me about how do we get to enhance Pan-Africanism in terms of getting science diplomacy as a cooperation tool, I think to start is difficult. I mean, when you look at the history of our network, in 2001, when the network was set up, we were only 9 science academies. It has taken us long and hard, and trying to transform those science academies, not just as honorific society, but also to be programmatic societies, to recognize the role that they can play in economic development, not just academic excellence. And since 2001 to now, to the point where we've gotten to 30 science academies, and I can also tell you that there are also 2 more academies that have applied to be our members, we've had to build a track record of why science is relevant. And that has taken a lot of diplomacy, that has taken a lot of convincing. And the last point I want to make here, it has taken trust. You have to build trust, not just on the geopolitics, but also on the relevance that science can contribute on geopolitics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And it's really beautiful and illustrative to see the specific examples on how science is bringing us particularly in emergency context when trying to put in place some measures or policies. And since you were mentioning the SDGs, I think it's a great success of cities that they managed to have an SDG of their own. SDG 11 about cities is like a mini SDG that gathers all the other SDGs but apply to cities. And I think that considering that the United Nations system is a nation-state organization, that cities have so much relevance into building this future we want in this vision of sustainable development goals is a great success of lobbying, if you want to call it this way, of cities and urban regions when the SDGs were implemented a few years ago. We're approaching the end of our session. We still have time for another round of questions, but I would like to invite our audience to start thinking about potential questions or remarks or comments that you would like to do. We have 10, 15 minutes at the end of the session to have also your contributions. Now going back to you, I wanted to obviously invite you to add any other comment or build onto your colleagues' contributions. But also, I wanted to share with you an open question to see what's your perspective on how city-led science diplomacy is really a tool for both advancing science diplomacy, advancing better lives for our citizens, and it's just not a buzzword. Because sometimes when it comes to science diplomacy, city diplomacy, science advice, it's great when we talk it in academic fora, but it might seem that it's just like a buzzword we use, that its content, it's empty. So today we had the opportunity to share some actual real examples, but what's your perspective of cities as complex systems with a very complex set of different stakeholders, as we were mentioning, how they are leading science diplomacy, and what's the vision you have for the next years? Maybe we can start again with you, Anthony.
The word that I think really sticks out in this context is actually, Jackie, because I think you were the one who actually emphasized it the most, the word trust, right? Because in this complexity, there is a lot of room for misuse of information. There's a lot of, extractiveness that could come out of this. But building trust and the track record that you mentioned, having kind of these successes that you can point to build trust is on one end. I think the other one is this engagement with community that I think is very distinct at the city level. It's very hard to do that at the national level. Right? And UN Habitat will have a hard time doing this in 45,000 cities. But cities individually can really hone down and co-generate those questions, co-create those data sets, or the mechanisms by which we create those data sets, to then going back to that issue of trust. And I think how we can begin to share these successes, how we share the ways we approach trust building, I think will be of utmost importance, particularly when there's a chance that people will not trust what the science says. And that becomes incredibly problematic when we have water that's coming up, or cities in the other way are sinking. We were talking about this earlier. How do we actually build that kind of social resilience that science can offer, but that it informs policy, and that then we can create boutique policies or boutique approaches. But ultimately, it starts with trust.
Thank you. I really love what Jackie was sharing, and those very concrete examples make it so clear. I would say also, maybe in our experience as well, we came to a point where we realized the contextualization, the importance of it was also, we had the national smart city master plan, but then, and we did a lot of the pilot projects and the experimentation and discussions within the city of Kigali, which is the capital. And as you can see, there's the infrastructure, the skills, and so on. And then when we started we said, okay, let's start with the pilots that have succeeded here and scale them to the secondary cities. We call them secondary here. When we did that, the mayors told us, no, that solution is not relevant for me. I don't need that. Why would you bring me smart parking when I don't even have enough cars in the city? So rearrange the priorities. And then that led us to a point where we said, okay, let's shift away from the national blueprint and now bring it down to city level blueprint. And now this is the exercise where we're just beginning actually right now, is to develop the city level strategies that look at we have in Rwanda we have 30 districts, and so we decided to look at how do we make sure that and each district has a DDP, district development plan. And so we said, let's look at the district development plan, look at the urban resilience policy for the country, the smart cities policy for the country, and all these other policies. Recently, we developed a national data sharing framework that sets into place basically the data formats that we need to have for our systems to be able to even interact with each other. They need to be speaking the same language in a sense, collecting the same kinds of data and formats and so on. And so we said, let's develop city-level smart city strategies that takes into account the respective district development plan and all these other policies to make it something that's actually actionable for them. And how we do that is also we have a program which we borrowed from Barcelona's experience actually. But I think Barcelona has what they call I think it's citizen champions that are engaged in these co-creation processes. And so we said, okay, as we develop that strategy, let's have a pool of, say, 100 citizens per city that come and represent the citizens' needs and focus and priorities and so on. Then we develop that strategy that's very actionable, and it's no longer a document that collects dust, as he said, you know, it's developed and it's sitting right there. But it actually helps this mayor to be able to package his information in a way that he can advocate for his city, in a way that he can mobilize resources. Because right now, when we speak to some of our mayors, they're telling us, I don't even know how to, I have all these brilliant ideas to solve the challenges in my city, but I don't even know how to package that information. So packaging it into that strategy, really, that's actionable, and then is easier to mobilize resources and, reduce the burden on UN Habitat with the 45,000 cities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Stepan, would you like to share your take?
Sure. I think very interesting. All the presenters are very strong in the discussion. I congratulate them. I think that we have to remember that most of the world's population is living in urban areas, right, in cities. I mean, in 2015 we passed already the 50-50 part, and now we know that most of the world's population is living in cities. When we talk about cities, it's not that we are talking about a very small number of people. We are talking about a huge number of people. Exactly around 5 billion people, right? The other part that is important is, of course, data and information can provide you some evidence, but you have to validate that evidence. It's not that you can work in isolation, collect data and information, and take decisions based on that alone. You have to have a community-based participatory approach to discuss if the data and information that we are retrieving or gathering has to be validated by them. And I can mention plenty of examples. For example, I've been involved in the response to Haiti 2010 earthquake. It was massive in Port-au-Prince, and it was quite devastating, as you might know or might remember. And at that point, what we decided to do is to create this neighborhoods approach, to go neighborhood by neighborhood and validating the information we got. It was one of the initial points of the program, and this crisis, this earthquake in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, was the trigger for us to put that program together and start initiating the development of this methodology. The other part that is important to also remember is that, I agree with you, I fully agree with you that the SDG 11 is an achievement. But at the same time, yes, as you mentioned, most of the SDG, if not all, are related to urban areas. So by having one SDG among 17, we, in a way, lost some strength, because at the end of the day, when we analyze how resilient is a city, we have to analyze all of them, all the principles and all the goals. And that's what we have done. But not only that, when we were developing the program, we realized that we have to also consider not only the SDGs as the umbrella global agreement, but also Paris Agreement for climate change, Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction, and the new urban agenda that most people tend to forget. The new urban agenda is basically a recipe to start working in cities. And it has the 5 key components, right? Urban financing, urban planning, urban governance, national policies, and local implementation. I think that those are the areas that we have to start working. Definitely, and as I mentioned before, our problem is scalability. And I'm not saying that UN Habitat has to implement in 45,000 cities. That would be ridiculous, knowing that UN Habitat probably is one of the smallest agencies of the United Nations, which is curious, right? If you think that we have the largest, or one of the largest mandates, which are urban cities, where most of the population live, and we are one of the smallest agencies in the system, in the UN system, is kind of strange, right? But the idea is to work in collaboration. We have agreements with city associations, UCLG, ICLE, C40, you name it. And we also work together with the World Bank, with other UN agencies, FAO, WFP, because we do believe that we have to include everyone. And when I say include everyone, we also mention, and we include also civil society in a city. We had experiences in Colombia, for example, in Bogota, where they were instrumental in making the change in the city. Without the citizens themselves, we cannot make a change, and that's key. Now, of course, policies must follow. Otherwise, we are going to start as new in each city, in each country, right? So once we have a good experience in one city, in country X, we must make sure that country X decides to implement that good experience in the whole country and globally. And that's where it kicks the important part that you also mentioned, the city-to-city collaboration. For example, when we were implementing in Mozambique, Barcelona, in Maputo, Barcelona signed an agreement with Maputo. So Barcelona and Maputo have an agreement of collaboration. And that means technical cooperation. It doesn't mean funding, but it means technical cooperation. That means that a technical person from the municipality of Barcelona can support the municipality and Maputo, and vice versa. And the same happened with Dakar in Senegal, the same happened with Asunción in Paraguay, and it's happening more and more. We have been supporting Medellin in Colombia, we have been supporting Tunis in Tunis, based on the city-to-city collaboration. I think that that's key. The moment that we start thinking that we can support each other without having to go through national governments or the United Nations themselves, then I think that we can start creating that network of cities. And it's essential, because you have to know, as the lady from Kenya was mentioning, you have to know the problem in order to solve the problem. And in most cases, you find parallel problems in different cities around the world. All cities in Caribbean have similarities in problems, and as well as in solutions, right? So I think that that's essential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steven. Jackie?
Thank you. Okay. I think for me, and maybe the interesting thing, which is something we are just trying to get a grip of, is just for us, both at the science academia, at the policy level, to gain an appreciation of both artificial intelligence and social media. Because there's a way people get to connect so seamlessly and so easily that you can get around the actual relevant problems and the relevant issues that need to be tackled. I think what we've come to learn in the activities that we've engaged in as science academies is that even while there's always concern that the introduction of AI, and first of all, that the concern is AI will create a lot of job losses, and then social media will create a lot of false expertise. and I think our UN Habitat colleague mentioned the idea of validating and also contextualizing these issues. The thing is this: if we do not get to use artificial intelligence, we will be run out of business. So it is the people who do not embrace either artificial intelligence or social media that would actually lose their jobs. But the AI itself would not take their jobs. So in specific terms, when you're looking at cities and we're looking at science diplomacy, there's a way of galvanizing ideas, of galvanizing solutions that artificial intelligence can give you at the touch of a button, that social media can get consensus and agreements on how we move forward at the touch of a button. So going forward, I think for me, I would really emphasize a way that we can adapt and utilize both artificial intelligence and social media, that we can get the science into the palms of everyone that needs that science, into the policymakers' discussion forums, that they're able to relay very short videos, very short messages in very few texts, for instance. And that would cause a revolution to a point that the geopolitics that goes around can actually be overcome. A lot of issues around not just validation, but also ethical use can also create not just new jobs, but create a means of using the technology to the benefit of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you all for your contribution. And I think it's great that we had the opportunity to hear all those best practices or examples from North America, Latin America, Africa, Europe. I think that the diversity of voices, both from origin but also from the different kind of organizations we all represent, it's a really an asset of this conversation we had today. I think this is also a good opportunity to share with you that from next year, Kigali is going to be the host city of the African Center for Science Diplomacy. This is a joint effort. This is a joint effort of the city of Kigali with support of the city of Barcelona, the European Commission through the Erasmus Plus program and the Norwegian Cooperation Fund, together with the Alliance of African Universities, and hopefully many of your organizations can also join. And the main purpose of the center is to advance knowledge in science diplomacy across Africa, but mainly advanced capacities. We talk a lot today in this session, but also in the opening sessions about capacity building and how we give the tools, the know-how, the skills to government officials, either at national governments or cities, and also to scientists when dealing with policymakers and working in science diplomacy. So this center attempts to become the place to go for both policymakers and scientists alike to get trained in science diplomacy and support the creation of national and regional strategies of science diplomacy across Africa. So I would like to thank the government of Rwanda and Kigali and also INGSA for being the institutions convening us in order to make this possible. And now we have a few minutes for questions, comments, remarks. So we have a couple of mics around, so feel free to raise your hand if you have any question. I would appreciate if you could introduce yourself, just your name and title, so we know where you come from or who you're representing. So the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name's Alphonse Nkurunziza. I come from the University of Rwanda. I'm the director of the African Center of Excellence in Transport, Logistics and Smart Cities. And of course, I'm part of the INGSA Team Hub Rwanda. So I followed very well the discussions that have been very good, interventions and discussions that we've had. When I looked through the room, to the audience that you are talking to, and having an experience that I used to be in the practice. I used to be the state engineer of Kigali City for almost 5 years. During that time, I was in practice in the city council, working completely on all strategies. The smart city master plan is what we worked on, which my colleague is talking about. And I was wondering, maybe we did a mistake. We always talk a lot when we come to conferences and meetings, but hardly to see some of these people, which I think they should be able to contribute, whether they are here. I don't know whether we have someone from the cities, in the city, who is reading in the city, who is working in any city. And this is why I'm talking about this. It's because the time I was in the city of Kigali as the Director General of Urban Planning and Infrastructure Development, which is city engineer as office, it was 2013 up to 2018, almost 2019. Hardly had I seen anything like this. Since, until I came back to the university, when I said, Academy of Science, what does it do? Now the university asked me, Dr. Alphonse, come to the Vice Chancellor. I said, no, you should be part of the INGSA. Then I said, what is INGSA? And I was wondering, these things, oh, we do it. I used to, when I was there, I used to approach the University of Rwanda and asking the departments of civil engineering, the departments of architecture, to come and be part of that and be able to give us some tangible scientific evidence that can allow us to work on such matters that are affecting the society. And until we had to write the MOUs and whatever, bring these students, the students so that they can work on that. Now we are here talking about very good ideas, very good sense, but if we raise here hands, do we have anyone who is working in the city? How do you can see someone? We are talking about between ourselves as scientists, as researchers in the university, we go back, okay, very good, we have done. But I think we need to challenge ourselves, the kind of ideas that we need to bring if we have to cross-cut from science and then to practice. How do we inform practice? How do we work together? Recently, I was with the permanent secretary of the Minister of Infrastructure. So he had come to our campus. We had a conference as well on sustainable energy and trying to look at the challenges that we have in clean cooking, and also on this issue of electrification. And then he was listening very carefully with students trying to present what they are doing in a conjunction with. Then he said, how do we be there? We are in challenges. People are here doing things. So why don't we link up and see how we bring all these challenges that we really face, we don't have time, so that the students at the university and the professors work closely so that we work together. I think it's time. I liked the oral interventions. I liked the oral discussions that you put across. And I'm not criticizing that we are not doing well, but I think also the kind of audience that we need to bring. So we should have most of these people even bring these problems, then we look at how we deal with them. So this is my intervention only. It is not a question, but at least to challenge ourselves to see how we move forward along this in the next future meetings and discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Actually, a conversation we had many times with Professor Rémi Quirion, the president of INGSA, is in the same way that INGSA has regional chapters, Africa, Latin America, and so on. It would be very useful to have a cities chapter, because usually we always think about national policy making in those chapters, and how cities could be actively involved in INGSA. So hopefully, if we all push into that direction, I count on you, we might eventually have a cities chapter at INGSA. Thank you. I don't know if any of you would like to build on that?
Maybe I just console Alphonse that what we're recovering from is silos. And I think we've done that at ministry level, we've done that at academia level, we've done that even in society. And as I said, when something works and you're still new and you're a non-state actor, it takes time to build on. I am sure we will build on. We will change that narrative. Thank you.
As an urban planner by training, 100%, right? And I think that everything you said actually was reflective of conversations. You know, the North American conversation, you know, is a cities one. And in some of the conversations, we're thinking about where is the diplomacy? In that, part of it is not just diplomacy across cities, diplomacy within our own communities, right? And the challenges, you know, for the North America, you know, as said, we don't need to talk about New York. Like, New York has capacity. We have data scientists, you know, but a city like Detroit, you know, a city like San Antonio, I'm just picking random, city like Calgary may not have that. So you need potentially universities to be part of it. So within the city, you need diplomacy in that there is not trust in many cases. I will say, New York City does not trust Columbia University. Flat out. Because how many times have we gone to the city as a university to do research, and then we collect all the information, and then we write a paper, and then all the people in the city government who have given so much time, and expertise. A paper is written, and there's no kind of praxis back to policy, right? There is diplomacy needed locally. So for INGSA, that is a conversation within what it looks like within North America. Who is it? What is the role of kind of the science advisor? What type of science? Because some cities have it, but is there maybe a different type of conversation as it builds out in this context, especially because trust is needed between our universities and our cities? Because rubber meets the road, and sometimes we write the paper and it never meets the road. And I think, how do we begin to interface? And how do we also connect to professional organizations? And I know that this is also therapy for me because I'm saying all the things that I'm thinking about. I will not say I am a best practice. I am not a best practice, but these are the things I'm thinking about exactly because it is so vital to translate our work.
Thank you. We still have 5 more minutes for questions, comments, complaints, and regrets. Anyone? I think it would be interesting to hear some of your experiences. You were saying at the very beginning that many of you are familiar with science diplomacies, or you probably work on that at your national governments, embassies, or research institutions. I would think it would be interesting for us also to learn from your experiences, or if your viewpoints differ a lot from ours. So feel free to share your thoughts.
Beyond diplomacy, because the scientist is not a diplomat. It's a scientist, a person, and entrepreneur, and also researchers. So I think this is very important to try to provide some platform for them to get engaged some policy making process and try to share the common vision about the future. So maybe we can collaborate in the future.
Sure. I think that the case of Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong working together in this kind of mega city in projecting. I spent 12 years living in Shanghai, so I have China in my heart. And I think this is a great example of how different cities cooperate in positioning science and technology as a tool for city promotion, but also as a tool to attract talent and bring knowledge abroad. So thanks for your contribution.
That the city of Kigali and the city of Barcelona are developing their science diplomacy strategy in the future. But what is the difference from the strategy of city and national level?
That's a really good question. This question comes often, not only when we talk about city science diplomacy, but just when we talk about city diplomacy. Does the international relations strategy or priorities of a city or a region into a nation state collapses or intersects in a way or mutually benefits with the national one or not? I would say that the ideal and what happens oftentimes is that they go together. I mean, not only that the city might benefit from the national strategy, as nation do have the legal mandate to work on diplomacy, have a foreign action, be part of UN bodies and so on, but the other way around. nations can leverage the soft power of cities and the capacity of influence that cities have. And I think that some nations are misregarding this, and I think it's really important. So I not only see it in a way that cities can definitely and should benefit from the national diplomacies, but nations should make the most of their big cities when it comes to diplomacy. And examples like what we were seeing earlier with the US and the climate agreement is a good example of that. Also, sometimes that doesn't happen. We have differing strategies. We see, for example, how in the last years, some Eastern European countries at the national level, they have more right-winged, or maybe if you want, a slightly more illiberal governments in power, while the capital cities were more liberal or pro-European or pro-democratic. I mean, you put the word that you think it's more appropriate. And in this case, the city diplomacy strategy of those capitals was slightly differing from the national ones, but probably in this case, and that's just a personal opinion, not of any institution I'm representing, was a good thing for the country, since while the national government was going in one direction, some of the big cities were keeping on track. We have Esteban. Would you like to contribute?
Yeah, it was on the previous point about the academia and the practitioners. I would say yes, fully agree with that. But I think that it's also a kind of human nature, right? I mean, I can only explain it that way because it happened to me in my 20-something years career in the UN. That when I arrived to a place, and I've been very much involved in local responses, I see that division or that separation or gap everywhere, and not only between academia and practitioners and municipalities, but also in donors, right? Some donors put money on the emergency response and limit themselves to put money on the 3 months response, while you have to apply for all other donors when it comes to development. Every donor country has that separation between what's relief, emergency response, and developmental issues. And it's I imagine that that's human nature, right? Everyone works in isolation, and that's what we are trying to break here, to try to open and have an holistic response in which we can work in collaboration. That's key. I mean, it's not the first time that I hear this, and I've been in many conferences and in many places working with municipalities in which the mayor was telling me, I don't know what this international community is doing outside here, but I don't see them, and we don't discuss these issues. This is my city, and they come and respond to this crisis without even talking to me, because they talk to the national government straight. I see, the normative and operational part that I was mentioning. I've been in conferences where you have all scientific knowledge discussing in one room, while practitioners are discussing in a completely different room, and the topic is the same. So I do believe that it's human nature in a way that we try to specialize ourselves in one specific place or area, and we don't communicate, and that's why we have to break that silo, especially when it comes to cities, because urban systems are complex and interrelated. You cannot influence in one without influencing in the other, or without impacting the other. And I do believe that this is what the climate challenge is bringing us. This is a global challenge that has to be responded at all levels, global, but as well as city level. And I think, in a way, that's what we should have learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. That some global challenges have to be, responded at the city level. Otherwise, we cannot respond to those challenges. And I do believe, and I have faith in humanity, that we are going at some point to try to open our minds and come with holistic responses rather than just sectoral. Thank you.
Thank you, Esteban. I think we had a last hand raised around here. Still? No? All good? Would you like to add anything else before we wrap up?
Something very, very brief is also to talk about, we've talked about best practices here, but typically we've also noticed that institution memory is usually in minds of people, and then when those people leave, right, all these lessons learned, all these best practices live with that person. And so I think even at city levels, we need to do a better job at documenting processes, failures, successes, that even with those best practices that we're sharing across with each other are being documented and kept within the institutions, not just within the minds of the people. That was just a small nugget that I wanted to add on top of everything that we were talking about that's super critical. Thank you.
So I think this is the biggest challenge that any organization or government might have. So well, I would like to thank you all for being here. Obviously thanking our speakers that are today here, as well as our remote speaker. I would also like to take this opportunity to invite you all to the World Science Diplomacy Summit taking place this July in Barcelona. So you are all welcome to visit beautiful Barcelona and contribute to the discussions that are going to take place there on science diplomacy. And I have just a quick announcement to do from the conference organizers. For lunch, because now we have the lunch break, please make sure that you bring your badge, and you need to look for conference staff to ask them for a lunch voucher for the buffet. So thank you so much, and we hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.